I am Julian, and I am 29 years old. A week before Christmas, I overheard my own family planning to use me as a free babysitter for their massive holiday party, while simultaneously forcing me to pay for the luxury catering. While I was working 80-hour weeks to build my career and save my salary for some solid real estate investments, my mother laughed and told my aunt over the phone, "Julian will be watching all the kids. He doesn't have a family of his own, so he's not tired like the rest of us. What is a few more kids for one night?" They planned to lock me upstairs with 10 screaming children while they drank expensive imported wine downstairs on my dime. But there was one thing they did not know. I had already called the catering company, canceled the entire massive order, secured my refund, and I was on my way out of state to a cabin in the mountains. And right now, they are standing in an empty house with 25 hungry, judgmental guests panicking and blowing up my phone. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their perfect, entitled Christmas into a total public disaster, hit that like button if you believe in standing up for yourself against toxic relatives. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comment section below. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really started. I have always been the guy who supposedly had it all together. I work as a senior data analyst at a major tech firm in the city. I pull in a very solid salary. I maximize my 401k contributions every single year, and I live in a spacious, modern apartment right near the downtown core. My coworkers and my friends think I am living the absolute dream. I have disposable income. I have no messy divorce dragging me into family court, no custody battles draining my savings, and the ultimate freedom to do whatever I want with my weekends. I can book a flight to Europe on a whim or spend a Sunday morning reading a book at a high-end coffee shop. At least, that is what it looks like on paper. But what they do not see, what nobody outside my immediate bloodline sees, is the absolute dread that consumed me every single weekend.
That dark, suffocating dread had a name, and it was my family. I live exactly 32 minutes away from my parents, Brenda and George. It is a drive I have made hundreds of times. It is close enough that visiting them is incredibly easy, but way too close to make believable excuses when I want to stay away. For a long, long time, I did not want to make excuses. I loved my family. I genuinely did. But the older I got and the more successful I became, the more I realized that their love came with a very heavy, non-negotiable price tag. And I was the only one footing the bill. My brother Richard is 34 years old. He is 5 years older than me, and he has always been the golden child of the family. He is the one who can do absolutely no wrong in the eyes of my parents. He is married to a woman named Monica, and together they have 2 kids, Felix, who is 9, and Harper, who is 7. I actually love my nephew and niece. They are great kids, full of innocent energy, and they always run into my arms when they see me. That part always melted my heart and made me want to be the cool, supportive uncle. But the reality of what came immediately after those hugs is what ground my soul into dust over the years. Richard and Monica live in a massive, sprawling suburban house in a gated community with an incredibly strict HOA. They portray this flawless, wealthy family image on social media. They post perfectly filtered photos of their Thanksgiving dinners, their ski trips, and their matching holiday pajamas. Richard recently leased a brand new Porsche Macan to keep up appearances with the other executives at his mid-level marketing firm. They project immense wealth, but behind the scenes, they are drowning in debt, constantly complaining about their mortgage rates, their credit card bills, and the cost of private tumbling classes for Harper. And instead of cutting back on their extravagant lifestyle, they decided to cut corners by treating me like their personal unpaid staff. The peace of my quiet, hard-earned apartment was nothing but a fragile illusion. I would sit on my expensive leather couch on a Friday night, physically and mentally exhausted from a grueling work week, analyzing endless spreadsheets and leading team meetings. But I could not relax. The anxiety would start to build in the center of my chest, tight and burning. I knew that my weekend did not belong to me. My time, my energy, and my peace of mind belonged to Richard. And the absolute worst part of this entire dynamic was that my parents completely enabled it. They actively encouraged it. They treated my time as completely worthless simply because I was a single man without children. They looked at my life, my clean apartment, and my empty guest room, and they saw a blank canvas that they had the divine right to paint over with their own chaotic responsibilities. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a pushover who would just swallow my pride forever to keep the peace. I thought the worst was over, that I had accepted my miserable lot in life. I was so incredibly wrong. The real exploitation had not even begun. Almost every single Saturday morning, right around 9, the heavy, demanding knock would hit my apartment door. It was never a polite tap. It was an entitled, rhythmic pounding that rattled the wood in the frame. I could be in the middle of brewing my first cup of dark roast coffee, or I could still be in bed, desperately trying to catch up on sleep after pulling a late-night project launch for a major client. It did not matter. I would drag myself to the door, open it, and there stood Richard and Monica. They always had these giant, terrifyingly fake smiles plastered on their faces. Felix and Harper would be bouncing off the walls of the hallway, their heavy backpacks stuffed with plastic toys, half-empty juice boxes, and sticky tablets slung over their little shoulders. Richard would immediately step into my personal space, clap me hard on the shoulder, and project his voice like he was performing for an audience. "Hey, man, the kids have been begging to see their absolute favorite uncle all week long. They wouldn't stop talking about you." Monica would not even make eye contact with me. She would already be turning her body toward the elevator, checking her phone, scrolling through her notifications. She would drop a hastily packed diaper bag on my pristine entryway rug and say, "Thanks, Julian, you're a lifesaver. We have back-to-back showings for some new real estate investments, and then a brunch reservation." Before I could even form a complete sentence to protest, before I could point out that I had a massive migraine, or that I actually had a date planned for that afternoon, they were gone. The elevator doors would slide shut, whisking them away to their couples' spa days, their bottomless mimosa brunches, and their child-free luxury weekends. 12 to 14 hours later, they would finally return. Sometimes they did not bother showing up until 10 or 11 at night. They would walk into my apartment looking completely refreshed, smelling like expensive gin cocktails and expensive cologne. Meanwhile, I would be standing in the center of my living room, which now looked like a disaster zone. The floor would be completely covered in sharp Lego pieces, sticky juice spills stained my expensive rugs, and half-eaten pizza crusts were shoved into the cushions of my couch. The kids would be overtired, crying and fighting over the television remote. At first, I lied to myself. I told myself I was just being a good, supportive brother. Family helps family, right? That is the mantra that was shoved down my throat since birth. But after the 10th weekend in a row, and then the 20th, and then the 30th, it became painfully, undeniably obvious that this was not about family bonding. This was pure, unadulterated exploitation. I was their free childcare. I was saving them thousands of dollars a month in babysitter fees so Richard could afford the payments on his Porsche Macan and Monica could buy designer handbags. 3 months ago, I finally hit my absolute breaking point. It was a Sunday morning. The kids had just left late the night before, and I was sitting at my kitchen table staring blankly at my laptop screen. My head was pounding with a vicious tension headache. My apartment smelled like stale cheese and wet wipes. I picked up my phone and called Richard. I tried to be calm. I tried to be reasonable. I told him we seriously needed to talk about this Saturday arrangement because I was burning out. The line went dead silent for a long moment. Then his voice came back, dripping with that unbearable, condescending tone he always used when addressing me. He told me I was being completely selfish. He said that he and Monica work incredibly hard all week to maintain their lifestyle, and they barely get quality time together to keep their marriage strong. He actually had the nerve to raise his voice and say, "You don't have a wife, Julian. You don't have kids. What else are you possibly doing on a Saturday? Sitting around playing video games? You should be grateful you to be part of their lives." I tried to explain that I had a life of my own. I wanted to go on dates. I wanted to see my college friends. I wanted to just stare at the wall and decompress in pure silence. I told him my job drained my mental capacity and I needed to recharge. But Richard was not listening. He twisted my words, accusing me of hating my own nephew and niece. My hands were shaking with pure rage when I finally hung up the phone. I realized in that exact moment that my brother did not respect me as a man. He saw me as a resource, an appliance he could plug in whenever he wanted. 2 weeks after that phone call, I naively thought I could appeal to a higher authority. I drove to my parents' house for our mandatory Sunday dinner. The house smelled strongly of roast chicken and sage, bringing back nostalgic memories of a time when things felt simpler, when I was just a kid and not a human ATM. I waited until we were all seated at the heavy oak dining table. I carefully brought up the issue with Richard, suggesting that maybe we could rotate schedules so I could get some weekends off to live my own life. My dad, George, did not even stop chewing. He barely looked up from his plate of mashed potatoes. He swallowed heavily, pointed his silver fork directly at my chest, and delivered his cold verdict. "Julian, those children are family. You help family. End of discussion. Your brother is building a legacy." Then my mother, Brenda, chimed in. She set her linen napkin down on the table and gave me this look of deep, dramatic disappointment. It was the exact kind of look that used to make me shrink into myself when I was a vulnerable teenager. She let out a long, theatrical sigh. "I raised you better than this, Julian," she said, shaking her head. "Richard works so incredibly hard to provide for Monica and the kids. You are single. You have no real responsibilities. You just sit in an office taking care of Felix and Harper is the absolute best preparation you could ask for when you finally find a woman willing to settle down with you and have children of your own. You should consider it a blessing." I sat there, completely frozen, staring at the two people who were supposed to protect and guide me. The unfairness of it all threatened to suffocate me. As I stared at them, a vivid memory flashed through my mind. I remembered being exactly 16 years old, sitting in this exact living room. Richard was 21, newly married to Monica, and they desperately wanted to go to a massive upscale New Year's Eve party downtown. My parents had forced me to cancel my plans with my high school friends. They ordered me to stay home and watch 4 toddlers from our extended family while all the adults, including Richard, drank champagne and celebrated. I remembered sitting on the cold, hardwood floor that night, holding a thick red scarf my grandmother had given me right before she passed away. She was the only person in that entire house who ever truly saw me as an individual. Her raspy voice echoed in my head clearly. "Do not let anyone turn you into their shadow, Julian. You shine on your own." Yet here I was, 29 years old, a successful data analyst with a massive investment portfolio, and absolutely nothing had changed. I was still their shadow. I was still the designated loser they could pile their burdens onto. I smiled weakly at the dinner table. I nodded my head and finished eating my roast chicken in utter silence. I played the role of the good, compliant son, but inside my chest, something fundamental and irreplaceable violently snapped. The fragile bond of unconditional family loyalty completely broke. I realized they would never, ever change. They would never respect my boundaries because they did not believe I was entitled to any. I left their house that night knowing I had to protect myself. I knew they would bleed my bank account and my sanity dry if I let them. I just had no idea how unbelievably far they were willing to go to exploit me. The first week of December rolled around, and the city was suddenly covered in a thick, freezing layer of heavy snow. I was sitting at my desk at the firm, my eyes burning as I ran complex financial data models for a major corporate merger, when my cell phone lit up on my desk. The screen flashed with my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times before I finally picked it up, bracing my entire nervous system for whatever ridiculous demand was coming my way. "Hi, Julian," Brenda said. Her voice was dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness she exclusively used when she wanted to extract a massive favor from someone. "I am calling about Christmas." Instantly, the muscles in my neck tightened, and my stomach tied itself into a heavy knot. She happily announced, speaking a mile a minute, that she was hosting a massive holiday celebration this year. She rattled off the guest list like she was planning a royal wedding. Aunt Clara was bringing her entire family of 5. Uncle Mike was flying in, and Richard's wealthy in-laws would be attending. 25 people in total. I kept my voice perfectly neutral, staring at the glowing numbers on my spreadsheet, and asked what she needed me to bring. There was a very calculated, dramatic pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Well," she started, her tone dropping into a pathetic, helpless register. "I really do not think I cook a proper meal for that many people at my age. My joints are just aching this winter. I was really hoping you could step up and take care of the food. I want to order full premium catering from Mr. Harrison's company. You know, the high-end restaurant downtown. You were doing so incredibly well at your firm, Julian. The rest of the family is struggling a bit with the economy right now, and it would mean the world to me." I gripped my titanium pen so hard I thought the metal would warp. Catering a high-end holiday dinner for 25 adults was not a small, casual favor. It was a massive, crushing financial burden. I took a deep breath and asked her for a rough estimate of the cost. She breezily replied, waving off the concern. "Oh, I am not entirely sure. Maybe around $2,000. But it will be so incredibly special, Julian. A big, beautiful feast to bring everyone together. And absolutely no stress for your poor mother. You wouldn't want me standing over a hot stove all day, would you?" $2,000. That was the exact amount of money I had carefully set aside in a separate account for a down payment on a new piece of investment real estate I was eyeing. But she laid the toxic guilt on so thick, playing the tired, frail, elderly mother routine to absolute perfection. Like an absolute fool, the decades of deep psychological programming kicked in. Caved. I agreed. I told her I would handle the catering order. She immediately praised me, calling me a wonderful, generous son, and promised to email me a detailed list of everyone's specific dietary restrictions and favorite luxury dishes. Exactly 1 week later, the sickening trap they had meticulously set for me blew wide open. I was in the middle of a high-stakes strategy meeting when my phone vibrated in my money. It was an unknown local number. I stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the office to take the call. "Julian, this is Mr. Harrison from the catering company," the older man said, clearing his throat. "We have a slight logistical issue with your Christmas Eve order. The imported honey-glazed ham is currently unavailable due to a severe supply chain issue with our European distributor. Could we substitute our premium herb-roasted turkey instead?" I leaned against the glass wall of the conference room and told him that substitution was completely fine. But before hanging up, my analytical brain kicked in. I asked him to pull up the invoice and confirm the final total so I could authorize my bank for the large upcoming charge. I fully expected him to say $2,000, maybe slightly more with taxes and delivery fees. Instead, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat again and read off the screen. "Your final total, including delivery and the recent additions, comes out to $4,000. $500. The hallway suddenly felt freezing cold. All the blood drained from my face. I gripped the phone tighter and asked him to repeat the number. He did. $4,000. $500. I demanded an immediate itemized breakdown of the charges. Mr. Harrison sounded slightly confused by my tone, but he complied. The food portion of the bill was roughly $2,000. The other $2,500 consisted of 4 wooden cases of premium vintage French wine and several massive, expensive artisanal gift baskets filled with truffles and caviar. I cut him off. "Mr. Harrison, I did not order wine. Who added those items to my invoice?" Mr. Harrison paused, rustling some papers. "Your brother, Richard, called our office yesterday afternoon. He stated clearly that he was managing the holiday account on your behalf and authorized the luxury additions using the credit card we have on file for you. A wave of pure, unadulterated, blinding fury washed over my entire body. My vision actually blurred for a second. Richard had hijacked my credit card. My golden child brother was actively using my hard-earned salary to play the wealthy, generous big shot in front of his snobby in-laws, buying luxury vintage wine on my dime without even having the basic human decency to ask me first. He was stealing from me, and my mother had orchestrated the open tab. I told Mr. Harrison not to process anything yet, and that I would call him back by the end of the day. That evening, I drove straight to my parents' house. The snow crunched loudly under my heavy winter boots as I marched up the long driveway. The house was aggressively decorated, lit up with thousands of twinkling Christmas lights, projecting a warm, welcoming, picture-perfect glow that I now knew was a complete and utter lie. I used my spare key, unlocked the front door, and pushed it open silently. The rich smell of pot roast and baked apples hit me immediately. I was about to march directly into the living room and demand answers about the stolen money, but I stopped dead in my tracks in the dark hallway. Brenda was standing in the brightly lit kitchen, holding a glass of wine on the landline phone. She was talking loudly to Aunt Clara, and she was laughing. "Oh, Clara, it is going to be absolutely perfect," my mother said, her voice echoing off the tile floors. "Yes, Julian is going to be watching all the kids. Do not even worry about bringing toys or iPads to keep them occupied. We are setting up the back guest bedroom with movies, and Julian can just stay shut up there with them while all the adults enjoy ourselves downstairs." I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to ice. 10 children. 10 screaming, sugar-fueled, hyperactive kids. And they were actively planning to lock me upstairs with them like a hired caged servant. Meanwhile, they planned to drink the $4,000 worth of wine I was supposedly paying for. Brenda took a sip of her wine and continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, mocking whisper. But in the quiet house, I could hear absolutely every single syllable. "It works out perfectly, Clara. Julian doesn't have a family of his own, so he is not tired like the rest of us. He has no real life. He babysits every Saturday for Richard anyway. He is used to the noise. What is a few more kids for one night? Plus, the idiot agreed to pay for the entire catering bill, so I don't have to lift a single finger this year." I stood frozen in the dark hallway. My hands balled into fists so tight my fingernails dug deep into my palms. My heart was pounding so hard and fast it physically hurt my ribs. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was not a family leaning on each other during tough economic times. This was a highly calculated, deeply malicious setup. They had absolutely zero intention of letting me participate in the holiday as a human being. They viewed my presence as nothing more than a walking ATM machine and an unpaid babysitting service. The sheer, breathtaking disrespect was staggering. I was standing in the very house I grew up in, listening to my own flesh-and-blood mother plot to ruin my holiday, humiliate me in front of the extended family, and drain my bank account. I took a slow step backward. I backed out of the house slowly, carefully pulling the front door shut until it clicked silently into place. I did not confront her. I did not scream or break anything, because yelling at them in that kitchen would only give them the opportunity to gaslight me, to call me dramatic, to turn the situation around and make me the crazy, ungrateful villain. No, they needed a much harder, permanent lesson than a shouting match. I walked briskly back to my SUV and climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was freezing cold against my back, but I barely felt it. I sat in the darkness for a long time, the engine off, staring through the frosty windshield at the glowing front window of my parents' house. I watched the dark silhouettes of my mother and father moving around inside, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just discovered their entire scheme. The burning anger inside my chest began to slowly crystallize into something very cold, very sharp, and extremely focused. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Harrison's direct line. "Mr. Harrison?" I said, my voice completely steady, devoid of any emotion. "This is Julian. I need to formally cancel the entire Christmas Eve order. both the food and the alcohol. All of it. There was a sharp, panicked intake of breath on the other end of the line. Julian, please understand. Christmas Eve is exactly 1 week away. My kitchen has already sourced the premium ingredients. If you cancel this massive order now, company policy dictates you will lose your entire non-refundable deposit. I don't care about the deposit, I replied flatly, staring at the Christmas wreath hanging on my parents' front door. Keep it. Cancel the order immediately. And listen to me very carefully. Remove my credit card information from your system right now. If anyone named Richard calls your office trying to reinstate this order, you tell him the card on file declined, and he will have to pay for the entire $4,500 upfront in cash. Mr. Harrison paused, sensing the absolute terrifying finality in my tone. Understood, Julian. The order is officially canceled. When I ended the call, a massive physical weight lifted off my shoulders. I had just pulled the plug on their perfect free ride. But I knew my family. I knew their persistence. If I stayed in my apartment in the city, the moment the food failed to arrive on Christmas Eve, they would violently pound on my door. They would demand I order emergency takeout on my dime, or they would physically try to drag me to their house to fulfill my duties upstairs with the 10 screaming kids. I needed to be entirely unreachable. I needed an alibi. I needed an escape. I scrolled quickly through my contacts and found Naomi's number. Naomi and I had gone to university together, and we had recently reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding. She was smart, kind, and incredibly grounded. A month ago, she had casually invited me to join her family for the holidays in Colorado. Her parents owned a beautiful, sprawling log cabin in the mountains. At the time, completely brainwashed by duty, I had politely declined, feeding her some pathetic nonsense about how family comes first, and I was desperately needed at home. Now, staring at the cancellation confirmation email popping up on my screen, I hit the call button. Naomi answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful over the background noise of a television. I swallowed my pride, took a deep breath, and asked, "Hey, Naomi. Look, I know it is incredibly last minute, but do you remember that invitation to Colorado? Is there any chance that offer is still on the table?" She did not even hesitate for a single second. "Are you kidding me? Absolutely it is. Drive out on the 23rd. My parents would be absolutely thrilled to have you. We are planning a massive prime rib dinner, building snowmen, and skiing all week long. Come escape the city." I thanked her profoundly, feeling a strange, unfamiliar tightness in my throat. It was the very first time in years that someone had invited me to a holiday gathering simply because they genuinely wanted my company, not because they needed my labor or my wallet. The next few days at work were a complete blur of hyper-focused productivity. I tied up all my loose ends, submitted my final data reports, and set my email to a strict out-of-office auto-reply. At night, I packed my heavy winter gear into duffel bags and loaded them into the trunk of my SUV. Meanwhile, my phone was constantly buzzing. I completely ignored every single text message from Richard complaining about how high his HOA fees were this quarter, secretly hinting that he needed cash. I ignored every single email from my mother sending me demanding links to expensive holiday napkin rings she wanted me to purchase to match the catering aesthetic. I muted the family group chat entirely. On the morning of December 23rd, the air was bitterly cold. I left the city before the sun even fully rose. The holiday traffic was already brutal. A massive sea of red taillights as everyone rushed frantically to meet their families. But as I finally hit the open highway, watching the oppressive city skyline disappear in my rearview mirror, I felt an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of pure freedom. I was actively driving away from nearly 3 decades of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. I arrived at Naomi's family cabin late that evening. The transition was jarring. It was a postcard-perfect winter scene. The massive log cabin was nestled deep in a forest of snow-covered pines, thick gray smoke billowing invitingly from the huge stone chimney. Naomi's parents, Marcus and Sylvia, welcomed me at the heavy wooden door with open arms. They were warm, genuine, completely unpretentious people. Marcus immediately handed me a heavy ceramic mug of hot spiced cider, and Sylvia showed me to a beautiful guest room that smelled strongly of cedarwood and clean linens. We spent the entire evening sitting around a massive roaring stone fireplace. We played board games, drank wine, and shared hilarious stories until midnight. No one asked me for a single dollar. No one told me to go upstairs and watch unruly kids. I was treated like a full adult, an equal, and an honored guest. But as I sat there watching the bright orange fire crackle and pop, my phone resting completely silently in my jacket pocket, I knew the clock was ruthlessly ticking down. I knew that back home, Brenda was putting the final arrogant touches on her formal dining room table. I knew Richard was likely bragging to his wealthy father-in-law about the expensive imported vintage wine he had supposedly secured for the evening. They were completely, hilariously oblivious to the fact that their grand parasitic illusion was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The storm was rapidly approaching, and for the very first time in my entire life, I was watching it gather from a safe distance, waiting for the lightning to strike them down. The morning of Christmas Eve in the Colorado mountains was nothing short of spectacular. A stark and beautiful contrast to the suffocating concrete jungle I had left behind. I woke up in the room of Naomi's family cabin, buried under a heavy handmade down quilt, to the sight of pure white snow falling gently outside the massive floor-to-ceiling window. For the first time in over a decade, I did not wake up with a tight, suffocating knot of anxiety sitting in the center of my chest. There was no impending doom hovering over me. There was no mental checklist of grueling chores I had to complete for my brother. There was no fear of my mother's piercing, judgmental gaze or my father's cold dismissals. There was just the quiet, peaceful sound of the winter wind moving through the ancient pine trees and the faint, rich smell of fresh, dark roast coffee brewing down in the kitchen. I lay there for a long time, just staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, processing the absolute magnitude of what I had done. I had drawn a line. I had finally prioritized my own sanity over their relentless demands. I walked downstairs in my thick wool socks and flannel pants, feeling completely untethered from the toxic reality I had endured for my entire adult life. Marcus, Naomi's father, was standing by the large cast-iron stove, flipping thick slices of bacon and humming to a soft jazz tune playing on the radio. He was a retired commercial real estate broker, a man who had built incredible wealth, but never once used it to manipulate his children. He saw me come down the stairs and immediately handed me a massive ceramic mug of coffee without saying a word, just offering a warm, genuine smile. Sylvia, Naomi's mother, and Naomi herself were sitting at the large, rustic dining table, laughing hysterically over a complicated 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle they had started the night before. I sat down next to them, wrapping my cold hands around the hot mug, and simply breathed in the atmosphere. It was an entirely foreign concept to me, this idea of a family actually enjoying each other's company without any hidden agendas. No one was keeping score. No one was demanding access to my salary. No one was trying to dump their unruly kids on me so they could go day drinking. They just wanted me there because they liked my company. The day passed in a beautiful, slow, healing blur. We bundled up in heavy, insulated winter gear and spent hours outside in the freezing, crisp air, snowshoeing through the pristine, untouched trails behind the sprawling property. We had a massive snowball fight that ended with all of us collapsing in the snowdrifts, laughing until our ribs physically ached. I felt like a completely different person out there. I felt like Julian, the successful independent data analyst, not Julian the family pack mule, not Julian the walking ATM machine. But as the late afternoon sun began to dip below the jagged, snow-capped mountain peaks, casting long, dark blue shadows across the valley, the reality of what was happening back home in the city started to creep into the back of my mind. The vintage clock on the cabin wall ticked steadily, relentlessly toward 5. 5 was the exact time Mr. Harrison's luxury catering vans were supposed to pull into my parents' long, perfectly shoveled driveway. 5 was the precise moment that 25 hungry, expectant guests, including Richard's incredibly wealthy and judgmental in-laws, would begin looking toward the kitchen for the extravagant holiday feast they had been promised. I excused myself from the warm living room, telling Naomi I just needed to check my work emails one last time before the holiday officially started, and we completely unplugged. I walked slowly up the creaking wooden stairs to my guest room, closed the heavy oak door behind me, and sat on the edge of the mattress. The room was cold, quiet. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out my cell phone. I had kept it completely turned off and shoved at the bottom of my bag since the moment I crossed the state line. I held the dark screen in my hand for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the power button. My heart rate began to pick up. The old conditioned panic trying to claw its way back into my throat. But I forced it down. I was thousands of miles away. They could not touch me here. I pressed the button. The screen glowed white. The brand logo appeared, and then the phone connected to the cellular network. The device nearly vibrated out of my hand. It was an absolute digital war zone. The notification chimes overlapped into one continuous panic screech. I had 23 missed calls from my mother, 17 missed calls from Richard, 8 missed calls from my father. Dozens of text messages flooded the lock screen, stacking on top of each other so fast I could barely read the previews. The messages started out mildly confused, then rapidly shifted to annoyed, and finally spiraled into full-blown catastrophic panic. "Julian, where are you? The guests are arriving and you aren't here to help set up the kids' room. Julian, the food isn't here yet. Did you give the catering company the right address? Call them immediately. Pick up your damn phone right now. This isn't funny. Monica's parents are asking for wine. Julian, Richard is absolutely furious. Call us immediately. You are embarrassing us. Where are the caterers? We have nothing to feed these people." I sat there watching the screen light up again. Another incoming call from Brenda vibrated violently in my hand. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the adrenaline flood my system, pushing out the last remnants of fear. I was ready. I let it ring 3 times before I finally slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Where the hell are you?" Brenda's voice exploded through the tiny speaker, shrill, piercing, and completely unhinged. There was absolutely no trace of that fake, sugary sweetness she had used to trick me into paying the bill. She sounded like a cornered animal. In the background, I could hear the loud, chaotic, terrifying hum of a crowded house on the verge of a meltdown. I could hear glasses clinking, multiple kids screaming at the top of their lungs, and the low, tense murmur of 20 adults who were slowly realizing something was terribly, terribly wrong. "I am out of town, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "I decided to spend the holiday in Colorado with friends." The line went completely, utterly dead for a solid 10 seconds. The silence was heavier than lead. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process the absolute impossibility of my statement. "Colorado?" she finally gasped, her voice cracking, completely devoid of air. "What do you mean you are in Colorado? Everyone is here, and Clara is here. Uncle Mike flew in from the coast. Richard's in-laws are sitting in my formal living room expecting a luxury dinner. The catering company was supposed to be here over an hour ago. Call them right now and find out where they are. Fix this." I leaned back against the headboard, staring out the window at the falling snow, feeling a slow, icy smile spread across my face. "Don't bother waiting for Mr. Harrison's vans, Mom. The food isn't coming. I canceled the entire order last week." Another beat of stunned, suffocating silence. Then, the volcanic eruption. "You did what?" she shrieked, her voice echoing so loudly I had to physically pull the phone away from my ear. "Are you out of your mind? You canceled Christmas dinner. Why would you do something so incredibly selfish and malicious? We have 25 people sitting here starving. We have no backup food. Do you realize what you have done to this family's reputation?" I canceled it because I decided I did not want to pay $4,500 to be your unpaid, locked-away servant, I replied, my tone turning as sharp and unforgiving as a razor blade. I have absolutely no idea what you were talking about, she lied instinctively. Though I could clearly hear the sudden, terrified tremor in her voice, she knew she was caught. Stop lying, I snapped, cutting her off instantly, asserting total dominance over the conversation. I was standing in the hallway last week when you were on the phone with Aunt Clara. I heard every single disgusting word. Mom, I heard you laughing about your brilliant, manipulative plan to lock me upstairs with 10 screaming kids while you all partied downstairs. I heard you say my time didn't matter because I don't have a family of my own. You never wanted me there as your son. You wanted me there as your free babysitter. And you wanted me to pay for the privilege. I heard a sharp intake of breath. She was completely trapped, and she knew it. But narcissists never apologize. They just deflect and attack. Before she could try to spin it, I heard a scuffle, and the phone was violently snatched from her hand. Listen to me, you ungrateful piece of trash, Richard's voice growled through the phone. He was furious, completely losing his carefully curated executive persona. You are going to fix this right now. You are going to call whatever pathetic local restaurant is still open, and you are going to order 50 pizzas on your credit card. You are ruining my holiday. Monica's parents are here. You are embarrassing me in front of my father-in-law. I actually laughed. A genuine, harsh, booming laugh that bubbled up from the darkest part of my chest. Felt incredible. Embarrassing you, Richard? You embarrass yourself. And speaking of my credit card, did you really think I wouldn't find out about the $2,500 worth of vintage French wine you tried to sneak onto my catering invoice? Did you really think you could commit credit card fraud to look like a big shot in front of your wealthy in-laws without me noticing? That is family money, Richard yelled, completely abandoning all logic in his blind, panicked rage. You owe us. You sit in your fancy apartment hoarding your salary while I have a massive mortgage, HOA fees, and a college fund to build. You were supposed to cover this. It's your duty as the single brother. I don't owe you a single dime, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. I am not your bank. I am not your babysitter. I am not your shadow anymore. I am completely done. Enjoy your empty table, Richard. Figure it out yourself. Merry Christmas. Before he could scream another insult, before my mother could grab the phone back and weaponize her fake tears, I pulled the phone away from my face and hit the red button. I ended the call. My heart was racing, pounding against my ribs like a jackhammer, but I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. For the first time in my entire existence, I felt a massive, incredible rush of absolute power. I had finally drawn a line in the sand. I stood up, walked to the mirror above the rustic dresser, and looked at myself. I looked completely different. The tired, defeated, compliant shadow was gone. I walked out of the bedroom, headed back downstairs into the warmth, and poured myself a generous glass of red wine with Naomi's family. I smiled, raised my glass to the roaring fire, and enjoyed the absolute best Christmas Eve of my entire life. I knew the fallout back home would be nuclear, but I was securely locked inside a bomb shelter thousands of miles away, and I was going to watch it all burn. I kept my phone firmly off for the next 3 hours. I wanted them to sit in that misery. I wanted them to scramble, to panic, to sweat, to feel the exact kind of crushing stress and absolute disrespect they had happily dumped onto my shoulders every single Saturday for the past 5 years. After we finished an incredible, peaceful prime rib dinner at the cabin, complete with laughter, storytelling, and actual mutual respect, I excused myself to the back porch. The freezing Colorado air hit my lungs like a bucket of ice water, waking up every single nerve ending in my body. I pulled my phone out of my heavy winter jacket pocket, unlocked the screen, and navigated directly to the massive family group chat. The chat included everyone: my parents, Richard, Monica, Aunt Clara, Uncle Mike, various older cousins, and even Monica's parents, who had been added to coordinate holiday logistics. The chat was an absolute, unmitigated bloodbath. I scrolled to the very top to see exactly how the disaster had unfolded while I was eating my perfectly cooked steak. At 5:45 p.m., Brenda had sent a massive, dramatic paragraph to the group chat, clearly trying to control the narrative, do damage control, and paint herself as the ultimate tragic victim of a cruel world. Brenda, family, I am so heartbroken and devastated to announce that our Christmas is completely ruined. The luxury catering company, Harrison's, completely scammed us. They took the massive deposit Julian generously paid, and they never showed up. They are refusing to answer their phones, and their storefront is locked. Poor Julian is so devastated and embarrassed by the scam that he turned his phone off in shame. Richard is currently driving around frantically trying to find a grocery store that is open so we can at least have some frozen food for the children. I am so humiliated that our beautiful evening has been destroyed by criminals. I shook my head, a cynical smirk playing on my lips. She was lying through her teeth. She was actively throwing a highly respected local business under the bus, accusing them of grand larceny to cover up her own toxic, abusive behavior. She fully assumed I would just stay quiet, swallow the anger, and play along to protect the sacred family secret like I always did. She thought she had the perfect, silent scapegoat. But Brenda made one massive, fatal, career-ending miscalculation. She forgot that Uncle Hank, Aunt Clara's husband, is a very prominent, highly connected commercial real estate developer in our city. Uncle Hank sits on the board of the local Chamber of Commerce, and Uncle Hank knows absolutely everyone who runs a high-end business downtown. At 6:05 p.m., the group chat exploded with a message from Uncle Hank. Uncle Hank, Brenda, that makes absolutely zero sense. I have known Jim Harrison for 25 years. We play golf at the country club every Sunday. His company caters all my corporate real estate events and charity galas. He is the most reliable, honest man in the city. He would never take a deposit and vanish on Christmas Eve. That is career suicide. Let me FaceTime him right now. He usually manages his main kitchen personally on major holidays. I could only imagine the sheer, icy, paralyzing terror that must have gripped my mother and brother when they read that text. The panic in that crowded living room must have been so thick you could cut it with a knife. I scrolled down quickly, watching the timestamps jump forward as the house of cards collapsed. Aunt Clara, Hank is on FaceTime with Mr. Harrison right now in the hallway. Something is very, very wrong. Hank looks furious. Cousin Greg, bro, this is getting crazy. We are literally sitting here eating stale crackers and tap water. What is happening? At 6:15 p.m., Uncle Hank dropped the nuclear bomb into the chat for everyone to see. Uncle Hank, I just got off the phone with Jim Harrison. He did not scam anyone. He told me that Julian called him personally a week ago and completely canceled the entire order. Both the food and the $2,500 worth of vintage French wine that Richard tried to secretly add to Julian's tab. Jim said Julian explicitly told him not to let Richard reinstate the order without paying cash up front. Brenda, Richard, what the hell is actually going on here? Why are you lying to us? The chat went completely dead for a solid 15 minutes. Not a single person typed a word. The heavy, suffocating silence of 25 people sitting in an empty house, staring at their phones, realizing they had been lied to by their hosts, radiated through the screen. This was my moment. The stage was perfectly set. The spotlight was on the truth. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to defend myself with long, emotional, desperate paragraphs. I had hard data, and as a data analyst, I knew the numbers never lied. I hit the little plus icon in the chat and uploaded the PDF receipt from Harrison Catering. It clearly showed the original order for the food, and then the massive, unauthorized edition of vintage wine authorized by the name Richard. Right below the image, I typed my first message to the group. Julian, I didn't get scanned, and I am not hiding in shame. I canceled the order to protect myself from financial theft. Richard stole my credit card information to buy thousands of dollars of alcohol to impress his in-laws, expecting me to blindly pay the bill like a fool. But that wasn't even the worst part. I canceled the food because I found out I wasn't actually invited to this Christmas party as a family member. I was invited as the unpaid help. Before anyone could formulate a response, before Brenda could try to type out a frantic, gaslighting lie about misunderstandings, I hit the upload button one more time. I selected the audio file I had recorded on my phone while standing in the freezing dark hallway of my parents' house a week prior. The audio was crystal clear. I hit send. The audio file dropped into the chat like a hand grenade. "Julian, here is the exact conversation Mom had with Aunt Clara last week. Play it loud for the whole room." I stood on the porch, my breath pluming in the freezing air, and watched the red receipts pop up instantly. One by one, every single member of the extended family, including Monica's wealthy, highly judgmental parents, clicked play on that audio file. I pictured them all sitting in my parents' living room, the absolute silence broken only by the sound of Brenda's cruel, mocking voice echoing out of 24 phones simultaneously. They heard her laugh about locking me upstairs with 10 kids. They heard her completely dismiss my entire life, my career, and my worth just because I am single. They heard the raw, unfiltered malice of a mother happily exploiting her own son for free labor and money. The reaction was instantaneous and violently explosive. The chat lit up so fast my phone lagged. "Monica, Richard's wife. Richard, are you out of your mind? You tried to steal your own brother's money to buy wine for my parents. You told me you got a massive holiday bonus at work. You lied to me. My father is sitting right here reading this." Uncle Mike, Brenda George, this is the most disgusting, vile thing I have ever heard in my life. You treated your own son like a stray dog. Clara, pack the kids up. We are leaving right now. Monica was so embarrassed that she took Felix and Harper to a luxury hotel with her parents and told Richard he could explain his lies, hidden debts, and stolen credit card stunt to her divorce lawyer if he failed to show her every bank statement by the next morning. The group chat collapsed into chaos as relatives argued, guests packed up, and Brenda and Richard watched their perfect Christmas image turn into a public disaster. Julian did not answer their desperate calls or long, furious texts. He simply put the phone away, walked back inside Naomi's warm family cabin, and enjoyed peace, respect, and the best Christmas Eve of his life. He stayed in Colorado for 5 more days, skiing, laughing, eating home-cooked meals, and realizing that he had not destroyed his family. He had finally escaped a system that had been destroying him for years. When he returned home on December 29th, Brenda, George, and Richard stormed to his apartment, furious over their ruined reputation, Monica's anger, and the family turning against them. Brenda accused him of humiliating them, Richard blamed him for destroying his marriage, and George demanded that Julian call everyone and lie, claiming he had a mental breakdown and faked the recording. Julian refused. He told them the truth was already out, that Richard's debts and fraud were his own fault, and that he would no longer be their bank, babysitter, shadow, or scapegoat. Brenda tried one last threat, saying she would cut him out of the family, remove him from the inheritance, keep him away from Felix and Harper, and leave him completely alone. But Julian no longer crumbled. He told her she could keep the dinners, the inheritance, and the illusion of family loyalty, because what she was really losing was her free labor and her ATM machine. Then he shut the door in their faces and locked them out of his life. Over the next 2 months, silence became freedom. His weekends finally belonged to him. He woke up without anxiety, focused on his career, earned a major promotion, increased his salary, and used his savings to put a down payment on a modern duplex as a real estate investment. His relationship with Naomi grew into something healthy and respectful, built on care instead of obligation. When cousin Samantha tried to lure him back with a sweet message about coffee and family, Julian checked online and discovered she had promised Brenda she would talk some sense into him. He blocked her immediately, recognizing her as another messenger sent to break his boundaries. Later, Aunt Clara called with a sincere apology, admitting she had known about Brenda's plan and had been too afraid to stop it. Julian accepted the apology, but made it clear that forgiveness did not mean access. He could forgive broken people without letting them damage him again. In the quiet of his apartment, he looked at the red scarf his grandmother had given him and remembered her words. "Do not let anyone turn you into their shadow, Julian. You shine on your own." At last, he understood that blood does not give anyone the right to disrespect, exploit, or drain you. Family should be a safe harbor, not a toll booth where love costs your time, money, and peace. Julian had become the villain in their version of the story, but in doing so, he became the hero of his own life. And with his career stronger, his future clearer, his heart lighter, and his boundaries finally sealed, he knew he would not change a single thing.